On the night of July 22nd, 1991, in apartment 213 of the Oxford Apartments in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a naked man with his wrists handcuffed managed to escape from a room filled with the acrid smell of chemicals. Running into the hallway, he found two police officers and uttered a single desperate sentence that would change everything. When the officers followed him back to that apartment, they opened the door to what would become known as one of the most horrifying crime scenes in American history. That night, Milwaukee discovered the monster who had been living among them, a man named Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, into what appeared from the outside to be a typical American family. His father, Lionel Dahmer, worked as a research chemist, a profession that kept him away from home for extended periods. His mother, Joyce, struggled with severe anxiety and became dependent on prescription medication to manage her mental health. The household was marked by constant tension. Arguments between his parents were frequent and intense, filled with shouting, the sound of objects being thrown, and doors slamming. Young Jeffrey would often sit in silence, listening to the chaos around him, withdrawing deeper into himself with each passing conflict. From an early age, Dahmer exhibited signs of profound isolation. He had few friends and seemed to exist in an emotional void that even those closest to him could not penetrate. At around 4 or 5 years of age, he developed what would later be recognized as a deeply troubling fascination with dead animals. He would collect roadkill and other animal remains, taking them to a small shed behind his house. There, in solitude, he would dissect the carcasses, examining their internal organs with an intensity that went far beyond childhood curiosity. He began preserving some specimens in jars filled with formaldehyde, a chemical his father used in his work. Many of his classmates later recalled that while Dahmer seemed strange and isolated, he never appeared threatening or violent. He was simply odd, quiet, and kept to himself. As Dahmer entered his teenage years, the darkness within him began to manifest in more concrete ways. At the age of 14, he started drinking alcohol heavily, using it as a way to numb the growing void inside him. He would smuggle liquor to school and drink during classes, a behavior that went largely unnoticed or unaddressed by the adults around him. During this period, his parents' marriage deteriorated further, and Dahmer became consumed by a fear of abandonment. This fear evolved into an obsessive need to keep people near him to prevent them from leaving. Despite these clear warning signs, no one in his life sought professional psychological help for him. He drifted through his adolescence alone, his inner turmoil growing more intense with each passing year. The summer of 1978 marked a turning point in Jeffrey Dahmer's life and the beginning of a horrific pattern that would claim 17 lives over the next 13 years. Just weeks after graduating from high school, Dahmer was driving alone when he encountered Stephen Hicks, an 18-year-old hitchhiker on his way to a rock concert. Dahmer invited Hicks back to his house, which was empty at the time, offering him beer and companionship. They spent several hours together, drinking and talking. When Hicks indicated that he wanted to leave something inside, Dahmer snapped. The overwhelming fear of being left alone again consumed him. Unable to bear the thought of Hicks walking away, Dahmer picked up a barbell and struck him in the head, killing him. In the days that followed, Dahmer dismembered the body in his basement, crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered the remains in the woods behind his house. Years later, when asked about this first murder, Dahmer stated that he had not planned to kill anyone, but when the moment arrived, he found himself unable to resist the compulsion. Following the murder of Stephen Hicks, Dahmer entered what appeared to be a period of dormancy that lasted nearly 9 years, though the violent fantasies never left him. He briefly attended Ohio State University, but dropped out after 1 semester, unable to control his drinking. He then enlisted in the United States Army, hoping that structure and discipline might help him, but he was discharged after less than 2 years due to his chronic alcohol abuse. During this period, while he did not kill again, his fantasies of murder and absolute control over another person grew stronger and more detailed. He lived in isolation, drifting through jobs and locations without purpose or direction, and never received any form of psychological treatment that might have altered his trajectory. In September 1987, the darkness that had been smoldering within Dahmer reignited. He was working as a mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia chocolate factory and living with his grandmother. One evening, he met Stephen Tuomi at a gay bar. The two went to the Ambassador Hotel together and rented a room. Dahmer later claimed that he drank so heavily that night that he experienced a complete blackout. When he regained consciousness the following morning, he found Tuomi dead on the bed, his chest severely bruised, as if from being crushed. Dahmer stated that he had no memory of killing him. However, rather than panic or call for help, Dahmer felt something else entirely. He purchased a large suitcase, placed Tuomi's body inside, and transported it to his grandmother's basement. There, he carefully dismembered the corpse, dissolved the flesh using chemicals, and disposed of the remains. This murder, according to Dahmer's later testimony, represented the point of no return. He realized that he had crossed a threshold from which there could be no retreat, and something within him did not want to go back. Over the next 4 years, from 1987 to 1990, Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes accelerated in both frequency and depravity. He developed a consistent method of operation that allowed him to lure victims to his apartment with relative ease. His targets were almost exclusively young men and boys ranging in age from 14 to 30 years old. Many were African American immigrants or members of the LGBTQ community, individuals who Dahmer believed would not be quickly missed, and whose disappearances might not be thoroughly investigated by law enforcement. He would approach them in gay bars, at bus stations, or in public spaces, offering them money, usually $50, to come to his apartment for photographs, or simply to spend time together. The promise of easy money and Dahmer's seemingly harmless demeanor made him appear trustworthy to those who were often struggling financially or socially marginalized. Once his victims were inside his apartment, Dahmer would offer them drinks laced with sedatives. After they lost consciousness, he would strangle them or strike them in the head. According to his later confessions, Dahmer did not derive pleasure from the act of killing itself or from causing pain. What he craved was complete control and the assurance that his victims would never leave him. After death, he would photograph the bodies at various stages using a Polaroid camera, creating a visual record of his acts. He would then engage in acts of dismemberment, preserving certain body parts, including skulls, bones, and internal organs. He kept some remains in his refrigerator and freezer. He boiled skulls to clean them and painted some gray to make them appear more like plastic models. In his most disturbing admission, Dahmer confessed to consuming parts of his victims, stating that by doing so, he felt they became a permanent part of him. Dahmer also conducted what he described as experiments in an attempt to create what he called a compliant companion. He would drill small holes into the skulls of some victims while they were still alive, but unconscious, then inject hydrochloric acid or boiling water directly into their brains. He claimed he was attempting to create a zombie-like state, a person who would be alive but completely submissive to his will. All of these attempts resulted in the victims' deaths usually within hours, in what must have been excruciating agony. Among the 17 individuals who lost their lives to Jeffrey Dahmer, each had their own story, their own dreams, and their own people who loved them. James Dockstader was only 14 years old when he was murdered in January 1988. An indigenous youth, vulnerable and trusting, he accepted Dahmer's offer to come to his apartment. Dahmer kept his body for 2 weeks before dismembering it later, admitting that the boy had been so quiet and compliant that Dahmer had not wanted him to leave. Richard Guerrero, 22 years old, was killed in March 1988. Dahmer later stated that Guerrero was the victim about whom he felt the most guilt. After killing him, Dahmer kept the body for an entire day, simply wanting to remain close to him for as long as possible. Anthony Sears was murdered in March 1989 and became the last victim before Dahmer was briefly incarcerated for 10 months in 1988, following a sexual assault conviction involving a minor. Dahmer preserved Sears' skull and genitals in a box, later explaining that he felt sexual arousal only in the presence of completely still, lifeless bodies. This marked a critical evolution in his pathology. He was no longer simply killing people, he was attempting to keep them. After his release from prison in 1990, Dahmer moved into apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments, a small unit that would become the site of the majority of his crimes. Raymond Smith was killed in May 1990, and this murder marked another significant escalation. Dahmer began taking dozens of Polaroid photographs at every stage of the dismemberment process, documenting his actions in meticulous detail. He kept Smith's skull in his refrigerator for weeks. Ernest Miller, a 22-year-old aspiring dancer, was murdered in September 1990. Dahmer ran out of sedatives and was forced to kill Miller by cutting his throat. He preserved Miller's heart and bicep muscles, consuming portions of them over the following weeks. This was when cannibalism became a regular part of Dahmer's pattern. The case of Konarek synthesomphone stands as one of the most tragic and controversial aspects of the Dahmer investigation. On May 27, 1991, the 14-year-old boy managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment and was found by two women in the street, naked, disoriented, and bleeding. The women called the police, and when officers arrived, Dahmer emerged from his apartment and calmly explained that synthesomphone was his 19-year-old boyfriend and that they had simply had an argument. Despite the boy's obvious distress and the protests of the women who had found him, the officers accepted Dahmer's explanation and returned the boy to him. Within 2 hours of being handed back to Dahmer, Konarek synthesomphone was dead. His skull was later found in Dahmer's apartment. The case sparked national outrage and raised serious questions about racial bias and police negligence, as the officers had failed to check Dahmer's background, which would have revealed his prior conviction for child molestation. Matt Turner was murdered in June 1991 after meeting Dahmer at a Pride festival in Chicago. Jeremiah Weinberger, 23 years old, was killed in early July 1991. Dahmer later described Weinberger as someone he found particularly appealing because he seemed clean and polite. In an attempt to create his zombie servant, Dahmer drilled into Weinberger's skull and poured boiling water into the opening. Weinberger survived for several hours in unimaginable agony before dying. Oliver Lacey was killed in mid-July 1991, and Dahmer placed his heart, head, and other body parts in the refrigerator, intending to consume them gradually. Joseph Braidhoft, 25 years old, became Dahmer's final victim in late July 1991. His body was left in the apartment for so long that the smell of decomposition became overwhelming, permeating the building. On the evening of July 22, 1991, Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old man, accepted Dahmer's invitation to come to his apartment to watch videos and have a few drinks. Once inside, Dahmer handcuffed Edwards and held a knife to his throat, threatening to kill him. Edwards, sensing the gravity of his situation, managed to keep Dahmer talking, complimenting him, and attempting to build rapport while looking for any opportunity to escape. When Dahmer momentarily relaxed his guard, Edwards struck him in the face and ran from the apartment, flagging down a police car with the handcuffs still dangling from his wrist. Two Milwaukee police officers, Robert Routh and Rolf Mueller, followed Edwards back to apartment 213. When Dahmer answered the door, he appeared calm and cooperative. But when the officers entered and began searching the apartment, they discovered the photographs. Polaroids showing bodies in various stages of dismemberment were scattered throughout. Dahmer was immediately placed under arrest. The subsequent search of apartment 213 revealed a scene that horrified even the most experienced investigators. Inside the refrigerator, officers found a human head, a human heart, and portions of arms and legs carefully wrapped in plastic bags. A large barrel in this bedroom contained the remains of 3 decomposing bodies, submerged in acid. Throughout the apartment, investigators found an extensive collection of dismemberment tools, including knives, saws, and a large cutting board. They also recovered 74 Polaroid photographs, documenting Dahmer's crimes in graphic detail, showing the entire process from initial sedation through dismemberment and preservation. The small apartment had been transformed into a macabre workshop, thick with the smell of death and chemicals. From the moment of his arrest, Jeffrey Dahmer was cooperative with investigators. He provided detailed confessions to all of his crimes, speaking in a calm, matter-of-fact tone about the murders, the dismemberment, the consumption of human flesh, and his failed experiments. When questioned about his motivations, Dahmer consistently stated that he was not driven by hatred or a desire to cause suffering. He claimed that he did not want his victims to be in pain. What he wanted, he explained, was simply for them never to leave him. His actions, he said, were driven by a combination of profound loneliness, sexual deviation, alcoholism, and an overwhelming compulsion to possess complete control over another human being. The question of Jeffrey Dahmer's sanity became central to his trial. His defense attorneys argued that he suffered from severe mental illness and should be found not guilty by reason of insanity. A team of psychiatrists and psychologists evaluated him extensively. While they agreed that Dahmer suffered from various personality disorders and paraphilias, the court ultimately determined that he was legally sane. The evidence showed that Dahmer understood that his actions were wrong, that he had taken deliberate steps to avoid detection, and that he had the capacity to control his behavior when necessary. In February 1992, after a brief trial, Jeffrey Dahmer was found guilty on 15 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, with each sentence carrying a minimum of 70 years. Wisconsin had abolished the death penalty in 1853, so life imprisonment was the maximum punishment available. A 16th life sentence was later added for a murder committed in Ohio. During the sentencing hearing, family members of the victims were given the opportunity to address the court and confront Dahmer directly. Their statements were filled with anguish, rage, and grief. Some spoke of the young men's dreams and aspirations that had been stolen from them. Others described the unbearable pain of not knowing what had happened to their loved ones for months or years, and then having to learn the horrific truth. One family member attempted to physically attack Dahmer in the courtroom, but was restrained. Dahmer himself made a statement expressing what he characterized as remorse and acknowledging that he deserved whatever punishment the court imposed. Jeffrey Dahmer was incarcerated at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. He was initially kept in solitary confinement for his own protection, but he later requested to be placed in the general prison population. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was assigned to a work detail cleaning the prison gymnasium bathroom, along with two other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. Scarver, who was serving a life sentence for murder, had been left alone with Dahmer and Anderson by guards. Using a metal bar from the exercise equipment, Scarver beat both men to death. Dahmer was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. He was 34 years old. Scarver later stated that he had killed Dahmer because he was disgusted by his crimes, and because Dahmer would fashion severed limbs out of food and use ketchup to simulate blood, taunting other inmates. Many people, including some family members of Dahmer's victims, viewed his death as a form of justice that the legal system could not provide. The Jeffrey Dahmer case had profound and lasting impacts on American society. It exposed serious failures in law enforcement, particularly regarding the treatment of marginalized communities. The case of Conorak Synthesomphone brought national attention to issues of racial bias, homophobia, and police indifference. Investigations revealed that officers had failed to follow basic protocols and had dismissed the concerns of witnesses because of assumptions about the people involved. The two officers who returned Synthesomphone to Dahmer were fired, but later reinstated after an appeal, a decision that sparked further controversy and protests. The case also highlighted significant gaps in mental health support systems and the consequences of untreated psychological disorders. Dahmer had exhibited warning signs from a very young age, signs that were noticed but never adequately addressed. His childhood was marked by parental neglect, social isolation, and clear behavioral abnormalities, yet no intervention occurred. His story became a case study in criminology and psychology programs, illustrating how a combination of biological predisposition, childhood trauma, social isolation, and lack of intervention can result in catastrophic outcomes. The media's extensive coverage of the Dahmer case sparked debates about the line between public information and exploitation. Books, documentaries, and later television series and films were produced about Dahmer, some focusing on the psychology of serial killers and others criticized for sensationalizing violence. Family members of the victims expressed anger and pain at seeing their loved ones' suffering turned into entertainment and their trauma commodified for profit. Apartment 213 and the entire Oxford Apartments complex were later demolished. The site was intentionally left vacant with no memorial or marker as the community sought to erase the physical reminder of the horror that had occurred there. Yet the memory of what happened in that apartment and the 17 lives that were lost continues to haunt Milwaukee and the nation. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer is not simply the story of a serial killer. It is the story of 17 individuals whose lives were cut short, many of whom were already vulnerable and marginalized before they encountered Dahmer. It is a story of systemic failures, of opportunities missed, and of a society that too often overlooks those who need help the most. The darkness that consumed Jeffrey Dahmer was not inevitable. It was the product of untreated mental illness, profound isolation, social neglect, and a system that repeatedly failed to protect both Dahmer and those who would become his victims. The legacy of this case serves as a reminder that vigilance, compassion, and adequate support systems are essential in preventing such tragedies. It calls attention to the importance of mental health intervention, the need for law enforcement to treat all people with equal care and attention, and the responsibility we all share to notice when someone is struggling and to offer help before it is too late. If you found this account informative and wish to learn more about this case and other criminal investigations, please consider subscribing to follow future content. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments based on the documented facts of the case, and join in respectful discussion about the lessons we can learn from these dark chapters of history.